Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. Capitol Preview is brought to you by Mediacom, which is a public service show to enlighten the public and tell them what's going on up at the Capitol. Our guest this morning is Senator Nate Boulton, Democrat from representing East Des Moines and Pleasant Hill, District 16. Thank you, Senator, for joining us here this morning.
It is great to be with you.
I appreciate your time. So this show kind of just jumps in and has conversations on what's important to you or what you're dealing with up at the Capitol. And so I'm just going to start off with how has the legislative session been going so far and what's left to discuss? I mean, I think we're kind of a couple weeks away, and so I'm just curious what you have to.
Yeah, I think we're at the point now in the session where we're getting closer and closer to adjournment, and the big question on everyone's mind is what's going to be next year's budget. And unfortunately, we've gone pretty far into the session without actually seeing much action taken. And when we look at what should have been budget cuts that were made to start the session and allow state agencies and departments to deal with the impact of those mid-year cuts, we didn't see action taken on until last week, where we saw these mid-year budget cuts become very end-of-the-year budget cuts and have a real impact on higher education in terms of our state universities, our community colleges, our Department of Human Services, as well as corrections. When you have cuts that late in the fiscal year, the impact is a lot greater. So I think everyone's now looking at what is next year's budget going to be as they're dealing with these major cuts at the end of the year.
Well, as a legislator on the Appropriations Committee, which is a very important committee as far as the dispensing of the funds of the state, how are we managing Iowa's financial situation right now?
Well, I think it's been very short-sighted. I think we keep dealing with the same effects of the problem, but not the cause of the problem. The Appropriations Committee has now focused on a routine. It has been mid-year or end-of-the-year budget cuts, followed by permanent budget cuts, followed by rating of rainy day funds and emergency funds to make those budgets work, and then probably more mid-year budget cuts. And the real cause has been an overextension on tax credits, exemptions, and giveaways that are really making the budgeting process unpredictable and not yielding the wage growth that we need to actually support long-term investments in the things that make Iowa successful for the next generation. When we look at Iowa's economic stability and prosperity, it has to do with making sure we have the skilled workforce we need. It has to do with making sure that workers are able to have the rights in the workplace that make them want to stay here, to have quality health care. Those are the things that are at risk when you go through all these budget cuts and start undermining the things that deliver on that promise.
The other thing is another big one that I think is on everybody's mind is that Iowa healthcare has gone through some changes in the last with mental health institutes closing and Medicaid being privatized. How do you think those changes are affecting everyday Iowans?
So we hear a lot from Iowans of how those changes have affected their lives, and it's in a negative way. We hear a lot of frustration from people who have gone through this privatized Medicaid process, this transition, and then on the other side of that transition found less and less stability as we move forward. It's been a failure from the beginning. And Governor Reynolds admitted mistakes were made in going into privatized Medicaid. The problem is we're not dealing with those mistakes. Senate Democrats and House Democrats have offered legislation, including me as one of the co-sponsors, that would get us out of these privatized Medicaid contracts and get us back into providing quality services so people can get the care they need. The same thing with mental health. We've seen really a lot of people struggling to get access to quality care in mental health. And it's not like a broken arm or a disease that you go to the hospital and you find a network of support. A lot of people are navigating these systems on their own. And it's too bad that we don't have more action being taken to make that easier for people to get the care they need so they can live with symptoms that are managed as opposed to wait for a crisis to develop. And shutting down 2 of our state's 4 mental health institutes only made that problem worse. We had people that needed 24/7 care and supervision that were just abandoned by the state. I talked to one man whose brother was in the Clarinda facility when it was closed down. Within 3 weeks, his brother was dead because there was nowhere to go for that level of care and service. We have to get back to providing the adequate care and service we need for Iowans and then expanding that network of care, not contracting it.
How do we do that, Senator?
One of the biggest things is putting resources behind it. And we've seen some bipartisan support to actually put together the pieces of the puzzle in terms of the structures that we need. We saw bipartisan support. Last week we had 2 bill signings, one dealing with suicide prevention in schools and making sure that we're recognizing those symptoms, and the other one dealing with more acute care access at the community level. But that has to be followed by action on the appropriation side, making sure the resources are there so those programs can succeed. And again, it's the cause and effect problem. When we are going through all these mid-year budget cuts and permanent budget cuts, we're not going to see the lasting impact we need on mental health as we continue to see declining services and fewer and fewer people serving in facilities that need more and more supervision and care.
Well, and keeping in that same venue, workers' rights have seen a lot of changes since last year. So what's the impact of those changes been on people?
Right. When we talk about Iowa's future, one of the things we have to get serious about is making sure that we keep Iowans here that want to be successful in their home state and attract that next generation of skilled workers into our state for our workforce in the future. We hear it from employers all the time. The thing that's hurting Iowa economically is the fact that we have a skilled worker shortage in this state. We're not going to get there by eroding workplace rights where people can go to other states and have better protection in their workplace and earn better wages. We've seen last year the public sector bargaining bill tell everyone who answers that sacred call of public service in our states and in our communities and our schools, they're going to be entitled to lesser and fewer rights in the workplace. Our next generation of teachers will never see a wage increase that keeps up with inflation their entire career. That's going to make it harder for us to keep those qualified teachers that we need staying in Iowa and to recruit the next generation of skilled workers into our state when they see those things happening. And it's not just public sector workers. We saw a workers' compensation bill that eroded benefits for people who put their bodies on the line for economic progress in our state. We're going to make it harder and harder for people to choose Iowa as a place to make their home and raise their family if they're not respected in the workplaces that they join. We can switch that. We can start offering some of the positive things that we can do. Paid family leave is something that I've proposed in the Iowa Senate. Once we start getting on the front end of those things, we start seeing Iowans choosing to stay here and more people seeing it as an attractive destination to start their lives.
So we've talked about some pretty complicated stuff, some pretty important stuff so far in this conversation. What do you think the biggest things that Iowans are going to face after this session is over?
I think there needs to be a really heartfelt discussion about who we are as Iowans and what we want our future to be. And I think Iowans are going to have to ask, are we a state that's going to be defined by how much we give away to corporations and that's going to be the hallmark of economic development for the long term? Or is it going to be about making sure we have those world-class schools producing a highly educated, skilled workforce? You know, the most educated, productive, skilled workforce in the world has always been the strength we market to. The quality of life that we have, for access to health care, for making sure that we protect our natural resources, to make sure that we can still feed the world with our topsoil, as well as make sure that everyone in rural Iowa can enjoy safe drinking water and hunting and fishing habitat. I mean, those are the things that we really ought to prioritize. And I think that's going to be a question that voters out there are going to have as they think about what Iowa's future should look like.
So we'll flip over to the political side then. With new leadership in the Senate Republicans, right. What's going to change in the Senate for the rest of this session?
I think one of the things that we've seen happen is there is a real lack of leadership right now. You hear conversations about when is the session going to end, and there's not really a feeling of when that's going to happen. And I think it's because we haven't really seen anyone take the lead to actually start moving Iowa forward. And I think that leadership missing is hurting our state right now. And I think you can see that from how things have quickly started to unravel in terms of the direction of the legislative session with the change in leadership as well as other things that are going on. So no, I think there are opportunities here, but they have to be taken quickly.
After continuous cuts to higher education and community college, what impact will that have on Iowa's education system and the next generation of Iowa's workforce?
Yeah, we hear more and more of the concerns over student debt loads increasing further and further. If we have community colleges that are forced to raise tuition because the state's not adequately supporting community colleges, the same thing happens in our state universities, Iowa, Iowa State, UNI. If we don't adequately support the Iowa Tuition Grant and other programs, our independent colleges struggle and raise tuition there. What the ripple effects are pretty clear. We make it harder for young people, our students that graduate, to succeed out in the marketplace. We make it harder to recruit those 22-year-olds that graduate with teaching licenses to choose an Iowa school district to go into. When we have 8 years of underfunding our public schools against the rate of inflation, and then see legislation introduced that would take us down the path of private school vouchers after 8 years of effective cuts in education, then running away from our public schools. We have to be concerned about the quality of education in our state and, of course, the effect that has on the next generation of our economy. We can do better than that. We can make education funding a priority. We can make sure that every teacher feels respected in the classroom, that every teacher feels respected in their workplace, and has the resources they need to succeed in teaching the children in front of them.
There have been a few controversial bills in this in the legislature. Recently being the heartbeat bill. Can you speak a little bit to our viewers on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of women in Iowa are concerned about the future of reproductive health care. We've already seen clinics across the state close after being told that defunding Planned Parenthood would result in a new network of care springing up. We haven't seen a new network of care spring up. We've only seen Planned Parenthood clinics across our state forced into closure. What we have not seen is more access to quality care, and that really has to be our focus. When we see the most restrictive abortion bill introduced in the Iowa legislature and then followed with a bill that would make it so 5 of 7 court justices have to agree on a decision, it really feels like that we're headed down the wrong path. And I think a lot of people have spoken up on this and said this isn't the Iowa that we want to see for our long-term future. And again, instead of a state that focuses on restricting access to quality reproductive health care, and that fetal heartbeat bill would effectively change how we have access to OBGYN providers in our state by making it harder for students at the University of Iowa training to go into that field, complete their programs because they wouldn't be able to finish their residencies here. I think we have to be focused again on increasing access to care, not taking it away. And again, these bills do the opposite.
Well, you definitely brought some very good discussion to our show this morning. We're dealing with complicated stuff.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time, but I'm going to ask you just what do you think the next 2 weeks are going to be like, and just kind of give us a little bit of an overview. I know you said that we're coming up to the close, but what do you think is going to happen in the next 2 weeks?
I think it's going to be an important discussion of the future of our state. I really do, because as Vice President Biden often said on the campaign trail, don't tell me your values. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your values are. And I think we have to see that in the budgeting process. We have to start getting back to prioritizing the things we value most as Iowans, and it starts with that budget process. We hope a lot of Iowans speak up and let us know their thoughts.
Very good. We appreciate you, Senator Boulton, coming up to Capitol Preview this morning and sharing with us your views and your philosophies, and I appreciate that very much.
I appreciate the discussion. Happy to come back anytime.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us here on Capitol Preview. Please join us for another episode.